Hello and welcome to another edition of Halftime on the Hudson. I am your host, Robert DeFelice, and with me today is Nicholas Vete. We got a lot on the slate for you today, but we're going to kick things off with some headlines around the world of sports.
And we begin today with the NFL, as the league has come under scrutiny lately for two questionable roughing the passer calls that took place this past Sunday. One instance featured Falcons defensive end Grady Jarrett attempting to sack Tom Brady on a fourth down play near the end of their game against the Buccaneers. The other instance came near the end of the first half in the Chiefs-Raiders Monday Night Football matchup when Chris Jones strip-sacked Derek Carr near midfield and the play was called back. Rob, with this controversial play, where do you stand on everything? What are your initial opinions of what took place?
So, I feel like this roughing the passer controversy is a rise and fall situation that it comes up every once in a while. At the end of the day, I understand the rationale that they're looking to protect their players, especially quarterbacks, because they're often found in a vulnerable state when they're in the pocket. I do think that the language within the rule is not clear enough about what it actually entails to provoke the flag, that if they had specific guidelines of what it is and what it isn't, it would make things a little bit better. But now it is just over frequently called. It's softening the game a little bit, and there's just no clear-cut answer right now of what should be or what shouldn't be. Because then there are other times that you see hits on quarterbacks that you might think, why didn't they throw the flag there? For example, a case could be made in the Tua Tagovailoa situation where he had his head smacked off the ground that perhaps a flag would be thrown there. I would see it far better than the past two calls that have happened here. What about you?
Well, the problem is I think with a rule like this, you're never going to be able to have like, okay, when this happens, this is what the penalty is. When this happens, this isn't a penalty. Like, it's too ambiguous of a play to really have any sort of, okay, this is objectively what happens here. There's too much subjective opinion that comes from the ref on these plays. You know, I kind of reverted back before Herm Edwards was, took up the coaching job at Arizona State. He was on ESPN, and I distinctly remember him. He had a segment, and this was around the time when wide receiver catches was like well under debate. I think this was the Dez Bryant against the Packers, kind of that time period.
Dez didn't catch it.
And he said, you just got to use your eyes and see what happens. Look at it first, see what happens, and then make the call. And I feel like so much of this is just like, the officials need to take a step back when these plays happen and just kind of use common sense. Watch what happens. You can clearly tell when something is a little bit over the top or there is that kind of unnecessary roughness that's taking place. I think it's one of those things where officials are too quick now to pull the flag when in times of doubt they should just be keeping it in their pocket. It's still tackle football at the end of the day. Now, I think that then leads to the question of, well, you still got to make the call when it's necessary. So would something like college football, targeting, they go back and review targeting, they can go back and look at it. Is that something that's feasible? I don't know if it's necessarily feasible. The NFL failed when they tried to have replay on pass interference penalties. If they did something like this, I think they could implement it a little better because it's been successful when it's been targeting. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that as something that's possibly reviewable.
I think it's certainly reviewable. I think that the difference between the experiment that they had with the pass interference versus this is it needs to be a targeting situation where it's automatically, not necessarily automatically, but it's not something that a coach has to throw a challenge on. It should be something provoked,
I agree with that.
Provoked by upstairs to say, hey, let's take a further look at this real quick. Hang on a second. Because then you're not allowing the coach's, emotion behind the play to get into it. You're simply leaving it up to the league, to the rules, to that, for them to say, wait a second, let us take a look here and figure out what actually happened on this. And then they can reverse it or they can confirm it.
Yeah, I think that it's something that could be implemented. I think it's certainly, feasible. And also when you look at targeting in the college game, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't take a long time for them to review that. They usually come back with a decision pretty soon. I think at this point, you just don't want one of these these roughing the passer calls to affect a big time play like the pass interference call did in that conference championship game with the Saints and the Rams. That's what I think the NFL needs to try and avoid. And there is an owners meeting this week that hopefully they'll kind of get together and be like, hey, let's tone it back a little bit. Let's use some judgment here. This is still tackle football. These defensive players still got to try and make plays.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so incredibly difficult now for specifically defensive linemen and linebackers when it comes to making those plays that, coming from someone who played football, obviously not at that high of a level, but when you're in that play, when you're in that moment, there is nothing going through your head other than go. right? You don't have the time to mentally think, okay, what's the best way to approach this quarterback so that I may gently tackle him and bring him to the ground? It's just not feasible. It's not possible for a defensive player who is trained to hunt to be able to go through that process. It needs to be a little bit off of their hands that they can still go out and play football.
Yeah, the NFL needs to find that balance between player safety, protecting the quarterback, but also still maintaining the game.
Absolutely. We're going to come back to football in a little bit, but our next story, the New York Yankees began their ALDS series against the Cleveland Guardians last night. There were many concerns leading up to this matchup, including the announcement of the exclusion of relief pitcher Aldris Chapman from the series roster. This came after Chapman reportedly skipped a mandatory bullpen session after the team would not provide him with assurance that he would be on the roster. The Yankees were able to defeat the Guardians in Game 1 by a score of 1-4, but not without some blunders, including a costly play by third baseman Josh Donaldson, who began his trot after what he thought was a home run hit. The ball bounced off the back wall and back into play, and Donaldson was thrown out at first after being caught in a quick pickle. Game 2 is scheduled for Thursday in the Bronx, pending weather. Nick, what were your thoughts on Game 1? What were your thoughts on the series as a whole? And I know you were a little fired up about the Donaldson situation, so I want to hear your take on that as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, you touched on a lot there, and there's a lot that, I could get into. The first thing is the Donaldson play. That had me fired up immediately. It's one of those situations where, A, it's a playoff game. There's no excuse on a play like that to not be running it out, to not be hustling. You got to be playing heads-up baseball there. And it also comes from the fact that Josh Donaldson hit that ball. It barely even made it to the wall, let alone into the stands at all. Josh Donaldson was sitting there at home plate watching it like he just hit it up to the judge's chambers in right field. That wasn't the case at all. In that situation, you got to be running hard, paying attention to what's happening. It was inexcusable. He's lucky that he didn't cost the Yankees more. They were still able to manufacture a couple runs and get the win. But that's something that's completely inexcusable. And like I said, the Yankees were able to come away in that inning scoring another run, and they were able to come away with the 4-1 win thanks to the later Anthony Rizzo home run. But it's something that he really dodged a bullet that it didn't cost the Yankees more. And when it comes to the bullpen situation, is the Aroldis Chapman injury or the decision not to be on the roster frustrating because he skipped the team workout? Yes. He probably wasn't going to be on the roster anyway. What's more concerning to me is you look at this bullpen here. Clay Holmes, Jonathan Loaizaga, Wandy Peralta, Lou Trevino, Clark Schmidt, Litke, Castro, Tyone, and Herman. When you look at that bullpen, with the losses of Scott Effross and Ron Marinaccio right before the season began, I mean, that's as depleted a bullpen as you're going to find on top of all the injuries they've dealt with from earlier in the season. So that's what really comes into the concern for me for the Yankees. Not necessarily in this series so much, but if they're going to make a deep playoff run, you start to get into those best-of-7 series. That's where I feel the true weakness of this team is. And whether we like it or not, whether it's this series or whether it's potentially if they advance to the ALCS, guys like Jamison Tyone or Domingo Herman or Miguel Castro or Lucas Litke, they're going to have to come up with big-time outs and big-time moments in these playoffs. And I don't know if that's a formula that the Yankees are necessarily going to want, but it's unavoidable. At this point in this Indian series, they got the win in Game 1. You were going up against Cal Quantrill. I felt that that was the game they had to have because you didn't want to be down 0-1 and then have home field advantage switch back to Cleveland in Game 3 when you've got Bieber and Tristan McKenzie going up in Game 2 and 3. So they got the game they needed. I think they'll be able to carry this series on out going forward. So I like the position the Yankees are in, but there's still, the bullpen concerns me a little bit. And I gave you my take on Donaldson. That's something that just, I shouldn't have to say it can't happen again because it shouldn't happen the first time, but here we are.
Absolutely. Now moving into Game 2, Nestor Cortez is going to get the start. Hopefully he'll be able to put up a equivalent, if not better, performance to how Garrett Cole pitched in the first game, that they can keep him in through the first, hopefully, 6 innings before they have to start digging into their pockets for other pitchers. That gives them, and hopefully their offense starts scoring as well, so it puts them in a comfortable position before you're taking Garrett Cole or Nestor Cortez, your top 2 guys, off of the mound and kind of relying on some of your relief pitchers. So it's definitely a tough spot for them. We'll see how it progresses moving forward, but looking forward to seeing Nestor up on the mound for Game 2.
I mean, that was certainly one of the things that, coming into the trade deadline with Severino down, Cole had some struggles at times midseason. Obviously, the long ball, bit him in the butt all throughout the season. But now coming into the playoffs here, even without Frankie Montas, who they acquired, and he really didn't look good from the whole time he was with New York, Garrett Cole showed you why he's the ace of this staff in Game 1 without a doubt. You feel confident with Nestor Cortez in Game 2. You feel confident with Severino in Game 3. That's where the real strength of this Yankees team is right now, along with obviously Judge. You hope maybe that you can get a couple other hitters in the order hot. Harrison Bader has been great since he's come to New York and since he's really gotten healthy in New York, and he came up with the big home run in Game 1. And if Anthony Rizzo's a guy who gets going, maybe Stanton gets his playoff, gets heated up in the playoffs here.
IKF.
It's a formula where you can get really excited about what this team can do as long as they can avoid, really the one Achilles heel that they have, in my opinion, which is their bullpen.
Absolutely.
We'll move on now. So we are over a quarter of the way through the NFL season, and the storylines are really starting to pile up. Now, this is something a little different than what we've done in the past, but we're going to give you, looking at Week 6, what some of our biggest headlines are for this week. And Rob, we'll start with you. What's one of your big storylines that you're looking into here in this week?
Well, my game of the week is coming up. It is the Bills versus the Chiefs. It is the AFC Championship matchup. A lot of controversy went on around that AFC Championship matchup. The coin toss. Ask any Bills fan. They hate all coins for the rest of their lives. We really get to see a showcase. Both of those teams didn't make a ton of roster moves in the offseason. Obviously, the Chiefs lost some weapons. They lost Tyreek Hill. They brought in Juju Smith-Schuster, not necessarily much of an upgrade for them, but overall, a lot of their core roster stayed very similar. So it's, essentially a very good chunk of a repeat for these two teams. They both came back this season. They've had phenomenal seasons so far, a few weaknesses here and there, but overall, it's setting up to be a great football game. It's a great rematch from the AFC Championship, and we'll probably see them again come 2023, see them in the AFC Championship again. So I'm excited for that game.
Absolutely an exciting matchup, and it's two teams that are just playing football out of their minds right now. One of my big storylines of this week is the fact that both New York teams have really exceeded expectations at this point in the season, really beyond what many people expected for them. You start with the Jets, sitting 3-2 here. They've won 2 in a row. They head to Green Bay this weekend. Look, their schedule's actually been, fairly tough to start the season, and now going forward, they have themselves in a position. So much young talent all over the field. You talk about guys, Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed, Quinnen Williams, a couple guys on the defense. You flip it over to the offense, you've got so many weapons at the skill positions. Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, the rookies. You've got Elijah Moore, the second-year receiver. Elijah Vera Tucker's looking like a star offensive lineman in the making. And when it comes to what they've got really leading this team, I've got faith in Zach Wilson. I love Robert Saleh. I really like the direction that this Jets team is heading at this point. And, it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of progress here. But I'll give you their schedule going forward here. Green Bay, Denver, New England, Buffalo, New England, Chicago, Minnesota. I mean, there's games in there that this Jets team can win. Now, I think that they're still really a year or two away from being really relevant, but I think they're heading in the right direction. And it wouldn't surprise me if they're a name that's kind of in the wild card hunt going towards the middle of the season. You flip it over going into kind of the latter parts of the season. You flip it to the Giants, the other New York team, 4-1. Can't say anybody really expected that. Can't say anybody expected them to go to London and beat the Packers, but here we are, they did it, and the leadership of Brian Dable, he's certainly gotten the fan base to love him. I think he's getting buy-in from his players. This is such a change of pace from what the Giants have kind of had in the past because, you're getting success right away from a new head coach, and, with Joe Judge, there was never really much glory there, and, you're sitting here with the Giants in a weak NFC. And, again, I have their schedule as well. You look at the Giants here. I actually don't have their schedule here. But like I said, weak NFC, you get going here in the latter parts of December. This is a team that I could see being up around 8-9 wins. And that's going to be good enough to crack the playoffs in this NFC where we're seeing teams struggle. You're seeing the Buccaneers, the Rams, the Packers, all teams we expect to be great, underperforming. I could see the Giants making a push for the playoffs this season because their schedule is winnable.
Absolutely. If you told me that a year ago, I would have told you you're crazy, but it's certainly believable now. Now, for my next storyline, a team that is underperforming compared to their preseason expectations, the Denver Broncos.
I know this pains you.
It does. It really does. I love my Broncos, but it has really been tough so far this season. They made huge off-season moves. They bring in the Packers offensive coordinator, Nathaniel Hackett, expected to bring a revolutionary offensive system to the Broncos. They trade away their entire future of draft picks, as well as tight end Noah Fant and Drew Lock, to the Seahawks to bring in Russell Wilson. They're starting to build these pieces. A few guys are coming off injuries, and they had all of the pieces that it seemed that they could make a deep playoff run. The only thing standing in their way was their very, very talented division. But coming into the season, you already had Tim Patrick injured before the season even started, so that was a loss of a weapon for Russ right there. But First game of the season, the offense was moving slow against the Seahawks. You thought, okay, maybe they're kind of getting the jitters out. Oh, they didn't play their starters in the preseason. Like, give them a little bit of time. But they were dramatically underwhelming in the red zone. I think they only were able to convert in the red zone once that game. And Geno Smith came out of nowhere and danced on them. Now, when you're in a stacked division like that, a game like the Seahawks, who you were expected to kill, you got to win those games, because when you're playing the Chiefs, you're playing the Chargers twice a year. Those are games you got to win. So they dropped that first game of the season. Then they get 2 wins against San Francisco and I don't remember who the other person was that they beat. But then you go into the Raiders. The Raiders are 0-3 at that point in time. You got to beat the Raiders there. You drop to the Raiders. Josh Jacobs ran all over them. The defense had to be their strong suit, and it wasn't at there. So far this season, they've been pretty strong, but Nathaniel Hackett's had horrible game management overall for the team. He brought in a separate coach, a separate advisor to serve as that game manager because he couldn't handle that. That's an essential duty of a head coach, and if you can't handle that as a head coach, that's slightly concerning. The offensive play calling has been a little concerning. It's not really playing to Russ's strengths, and it's putting Russ in uncomfortable positions. Russ has never been great at throwing the ball through the middle, and that is, aside from check down screens and running the ball, that is the basis of their offense, getting the ball to their receivers is across the middle downfield, and that's something Russ hasn't been able to exceed at. They're trying to keep Russ in the pocket as long as possible. When you pay him as much money as they did, you want to keep him protected, keep him safe. I get it, but you got to let him run free a little bit. The times that he has been able to get out of the pocket, run the ball, that's when the offense has been moving. That's when he feels comfortable. That's when he sits into it, and that's when Russ cooks. Now, as injuries are progressing, you got Garrett Bowles out for the season. He snapped his leg. You got Ronald Darby out. You got Gregory out for the Randy Gregory out for the season. All of these guys are starting to pile up on injuries. They don't have the depth to back that up. Things are starting to look a little scary. The Chargers game is going to be very telltale if it's starting to push in the right direction, or if it's really the start for the loss of all hope. So it should be an exciting divisional matchup between the Broncos and the Chargers. Hopefully a little bit more offense than their Colts game.
I think it's definitely one of those things where it's getting to a real point of you got to see it if you're the Broncos at this point with where they're kind of situated. My final storyline going into this week that I'm really intrigued by is this matchup between the Eagles and the Cowboys. You've got the undefeated Eagles coming in, and they're going up against the Cowboys led by Cooper Rush. I got to give the Cowboys a ton of credit. When Dak Prescott went down, I kind of wrote their season off. I was like, this isn't going to go anywhere. They're going to lose their next 4 or 5 games without Dak Prescott. That's going to be it. They've hung in there. Cooper Rush has managed games. He hasn't thrown an interception since he's become the quarterback in Dallas. Their defense has led games, led them to victories. They single-handedly won them that game against the Rams last week. In Week 5, their defensive line dominated. So I got to give them a ton of credit. But when you flip it over to the other side, and you're looking at the Eagles, who are undefeated to this point in the season. Now, I know there can be some cases made that, they're undefeated to this point, but maybe their schedule isn't quite as tough as you would really like it to be to validate them. I don't know if I really buy into that. And the reason I don't is because the question coming into the season wasn't, is their roster good enough to be a legit contender? Their roster's certainly good enough. They've got arguably the best offensive line in football. They've got players all over the defense. They've got skill positions. They've got guys at skill positions, Dallas Goedert, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Miles Sanders in the backfield. Their roster's in great shape. It really came down to the question coming in was, is Jalen Hurts the guy? And to this point, Jalen Hurts has answered the bell. He's looked like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL to this point. He's played outstanding football. And to me, when you look at what the Eagles have done so far, and you look at their schedule coming up, I'll give you their next 5 games here. Home against Dallas. Just kind of previewed that matchup a little bit. They're playing for the division crown to this point of the season. Week 7, they're in a bye. Then they come back off the bye. Home against Pittsburgh. At Houston, home against Washington, at Indianapolis. I don't see a loss there right now. So you could be sitting here, and we could say that the Eagles are going to be 11-0 potentially through Week 12 of the season. I think that sets them up perfectly, and I mentioned it earlier. You've got a weak Rams team. You've got a Packers team that's underperforming. You've got a Buccaneers team that's underperforming. Really, the only other team in the NFC that I think has lived up to expectations, and they don't even have the quarterback they were expecting to play with, is the 49ers. So when I see how open the NFC is, tell me what reason that I can't think that this Eagles team is legit. They built depth everywhere as well. Jordan Mailata goes down. Landon Dickerson goes down on their offensive line. What did they do last week against the Arizona Cardinals? Jack Driscoll steps in. Sue Opeta steps in. And they perform like nothing happened. I buy into this Eagles team a lot. And honestly, it wouldn't scare me to say right now, this is the team that's going to be representing the NFC in the Super Bowl when it's all said and done. I'm not afraid to go out on that limb right now because I buy into what Jalen Hurts has done, and I buy into how well constructed this roster is.
Absolutely, and I mean, talk about their offseason moves as well. You know, the acquisition of A.J. Brown in that trade, absolutely crazy. Their draft was fantastic. They made a ton of moves. Now, quick question for you, just your thoughts here. Dak Prescott, when he's 100%, you think there's any type of quarterback competition, or do you think the Cowboys still think he's the guy?
No way. Not when you're paying Dak Prescott all that money. And again, it comes down to the fact Cooper Rush is managing the game right now. Yeah, you hate it when there's turnovers, but Dak Prescott is the guy that he does bring that offense to a different level when he's right, when he's healthy. I mean, at the end of the day, you're not sticking with Cooper Rush at that point. It becomes more of a conversation if Dak comes back and he loses his next 3. But at this point, when Dak is healthy, he's going to be in there at quarterback.
All right, and I mean, Cooper Rush has also built in certainly a lot of stock as he could possibly get traded or signed by another team this coming off season.
I think the fans are definitely liking what they're seeing right now. That's wins in that column.
Yeah, and Jared Jones certainly is as well. Well, that's all we have for news for you today. We're going to move now into a special guest on Prove Your Point. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to another exciting edition of Prove Your Point. We've got an exciting matchup. First of all, special guest, shocking return all the way from Manhattan. We got Zach Musso, the man, the legend, the better than Connor. Shout out Connor. And we have a newcomer, first-time challenger. Huge task to undertake here. We got Daniel Allback from my great state of New Hampshire. Got an exciting matchup, got some great topics, so we're going to get right into it. First one, the Mets. The Mets. Zach's Mets. Was their season a giant failure? Zach, we'll kick it off with you.
No, let Dan go. Let Dan
go.
go.
Okay. We're going to let Dan.
This is my team, so I'll let him have a chance to go.
Now, Zach, my condolences, first off, because that last game was ugly. But I think you got to look at it with a grain of salt. This was not a World Series or bust team at the beginning of the year. This is their 4th 100-win season. The last time they did it was 88. They've only done it in 86 and 69 as well. And those years they won the World Series. This is a new era of the New York Mets. It's the first time they made the playoffs since 2016. This is a team that had a lot of moving parts. Steve Cohen, this is his 2nd year behind the helm of the New York Mets, and he made those free agent acquisitions obviously to win. And they have 8 guys leaving this year, including Edwin Diaz, Jacob deGrom, Brandon Nimmo, a big one, a little underrated one, I would say. But Steve, what can't he do? He can get Aaron Judge if he wants to, which, sorry, Rob, that's not going to happen. That probably won't happen anyway. But what can he do? This is Steve Cohen. He's gotten a limited pocketbook with that luxury tax. He doesn't really care about that. This is a great era for the New York Mets. They finally have a winning season. They made the playoffs. I think this is the start of a new era. And, they can make as many free agent grabs as they want next year. They're going to look great next year. And I think, Zach, you have to take that into account when you think about this team. They were not out for a win this year. They were out for a World Series win this year. But as far as going all the way, they should be happy that they just made the playoffs.
Interesting points. Zach, tell me about how it was a failure.
Well, I'm just glad that Dan likes to hand out participation trophies. Now we know what his soft attitude is like. The New York Mets season was a complete and utter disastrous failure. You signed Max Scherzer. You have Jacob deGrom and Chris Bassett, supposed to be the big 3 rotation. You have the best closer in baseball, Timmy Trumpets. Let's play the trumpets. And, well, we didn't get to play the trumpets. Playing the trumpets in the 8th inning down 4-0 was just a disgrace. I love the Mets. I'm the most optimistic person in the world. Not tonight. There's no reason to be optimistic. Just because Steve Cohen in the future can go out and buy all these players doesn't mean this season wasn't a complete and utter failure. All of these guys are free agents. Most of them could leave. deGrom, Bam, Diaz, Nimmo. That's part of the big core of your team. And then to come out against the Padres, a team you had 14 more wins with, and look like that. You get swept by the Cubs in September. You get swept by the Braves. You lose 2 out of 3 to the Nationals. You can't sweep the Pirates. It's just a disastrous September, a disgrace. You know, me and Mr. Met were crying in the corner together on this weekend at Citi Field. It's just like, what are you supposed to be happy about? 101 wins. You have the highest payroll in baseball. It's win now. There's now this soft, like, handout participation trophies. Yay, we won 100 games. Who gives a crap? You're there to win a World Series. Utter failure, just disaster.
Yeah, no, the Mets season was a complete failure. They spent the most money in baseball and still couldn't win a World Series. So round 1 is going to go to Zach. I know he's still a little angry about that, so we'll give that participation trophy to Zach on that one. Moving on to the second topic. NBA season is kicking off. Preseason prediction for who you think who will win the finals. Zach, start with you.
The Milwaukee Bucks, slam dunk. I think they're by far the favorite. Giannis, the best player in basketball. He can do it all. He's developing a jump shot. Everyone better watch out for that. And let's not forget, they took the Celtics to Game 7 last year without Chris Middleton. If Chris Middleton was healthy in that series, the Bucks would have won that series. They were up 3-2. The Bucks won the finals the year before. They looked like they were on their way again. Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, and Giannis may just be the best big three in basketball. Brook Lopez is a great underrated center who has some shooting range, and they always build depth. They got an experienced coach in Mike Budenholzer and Giannis. What more is there to say? Everyone loves him. The Greek freak. I'm a Giannis stan. How can you not be? He's got everything. He can shoot. You know, his free throws, he shoots quickly now. They're the complete package. They're kind of underrated again this year, which is a little weird. They kind of get lost behind the Celtics buzz, but Giannis is the guy, and you always take the best player to win it all.
All right. Taking a pick from the East. I see you. Now, we're going to toss things over to Dan. Dan, who's your pick?
Let me start off by saying, Zach, that the fact that you said Giannis and the Bucks are an underrated team is absolutely ridiculous. They should be in competition year after year. However, you know who else is getting some players back other than the Bucks? The Los Angeles Clippers are getting back. They're getting back 2 All-Stars, and they're getting a new acquisition in John Wall. He looks amazing in preseason. Now, you got Kawhi Leonard, who's a top 10 player in the league when healthy. You have Paul George, who, by the way, went out and said he is fine with being the number 2 guy. He is giving the ball to Kawhi as the number 1 guy. Kawhi is an unbelievable defender. The West is looking a little weaker than the East. You mentioned Chris Middleton was out during that series. Well, the Celtics got some guys now, too, on that bench. They got Blake Griffin, a great bench player when you look at how deep their roster is. You have the Miami Heat, who are still in contention. You have the Philadelphia 76ers, who have Joel Embiid, and James Harden, who looks, he's trying to get refreshed. Tyrese Maxey also on that team. This East is tougher than last year. And, the Brooklyn Nets, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, they can still make a run in this Eastern Conference. People forget this is a stacked Eastern Conference, and when you look at the West, the Warriors, they've been, all this offseason stuff with Draymond and Jordan Poole. Obviously they still have talent, but what are they going to do with Draymond? They're not going to be in contention in the West if all of this drama builds up, despite their great players. You have the Denver Nuggets, who, got 2 All-Stars coming back in Jamal Murray. I just don't see them keeping up with competition with the LA Clippers. This is a team that had Reggie Jackson, Terrence Mann, and Luke Kennard as their top 3 scorers, and they were still a winning team. With Tyronn Lue as head coach, they can go anywhere. This is Tyronn, who has led LeBron and Kyrie, 2 veterans with some drama going on there. This is a team with a coach that knows what he's doing, and 3 All-Stars that can go all the way and win a championship.
Just the utter blasphemy I just heard was just unreal. If we had a rebuttal time, I would just eviscerate.
Oh, really?
No rebuttal time tonight?
Because the Bucks are underrated.
No rebuttal time tonight?
The Milwaukee Bucks, everyone.
All right. Both made some good points. The East is stacked. Giannis is a freak. But I'm going to have to toss this one over to Dan. I think the East is too overwhelming for the Bucks. I don't think they're going to be able to get it done this year. I think the Clippers do have some depth. I think, load management will be a giant question for them, as it always is with Kawhi. But
Deepest roster in the league.
overall, I'm going to have to toss it over to the Clippers on this one. Now, we are tied 1-1. Moving into our final topic. Week 6 of NFL. What is the biggest storyline in the league right now?
Zach, you take this one.
No, you got it. No, you're on.
No, because you were eager to talk
No,
about
I went
it.
first for the Bucks.
All right,
You
Dan's
got it.
kicking it off.
All right, you know what? That's fine, because Zach is going to talk about a topic that involves one team. And if there's any topic this year in the NFL that is the most important, the most vital to this season, it's the NFL's failure again with concussions. And it's quite obvious. This is a topic and a storyline in the league that needs to get addressed and is still getting addressed. This is the first time the NFL is attacking ataxia symptoms. So if a player has coordination loss, they're now not eligible to go back in the game, and they have to go under strict concussion protocol. Here's the thing, though. Tua, that situation broke the internet. It broke all NFL social media, and it made everyone stop and think. We're letting players go out there who stumbled, who clearly had concussion symptoms, and now could be even worse with long-standing brain injuries, and who knows what symptoms Tua could face with CTE. And going forth, there are some other players that have had scary concussions. Brian Hoyer of my New England Patriots was taken out. Naheem Hines in that Thursday night game, awful game, by the way. Teddy Bridgewater, Tua's backup, again, with concussion. That it was just awful to see. What does this mean for the NFL going forward? The ataxia syndromes should have been in place like weeks ago, years ago, and especially when they fire an independent doctor from that situation with Tua. What are we doing? This is the most important topic in the NFL, and it needs to be addressed. And that's more important than any team topic there is.
As someone who has suffered 4 concussions myself, I can agree that they are not something to be messed with. Definitely a big storyline that's been coming out of the league so far this year. But Zach, let them know.
Well, I should have gone first because it's not like I can rebut concussions. But I will say the biggest storyline in the NFL this season, the NFL is all about ratings, and everyone loves to tune in, is the return of the NFC. You know, Dan said I was going to talk about one team. That's because I tricked him with my big, intelligent brain. I'm talking about 3 teams, the Cowboys, the Eagles, and the Giants. Last year, everyone's calling this the NFC least. Look at the Eagles. You can make the argument they're the best team in football right now. Jalen Hurts looks like he could be the guy for the future. They have the best offensive and defensive lines in football. Then the Cowboys. How about Cooper Rush? Can't believe I'm talking up the Cowboys, but what a job just steadying the ship. And you talk about a defense. That Cowboys defense is scary. They wreak havoc against everyone. And what about my New York Giants? Brian Daboll comes in and completely changes the culture. Saquon Barkley is back to being the best running back in the NFL. Daniel Jones is played. He's eliminated the turnovers, which is the exact thing everyone needed from him. The defense with Wink Martindale comes up. They go to London, short-handed. They don't have their number 1, 2, 3, or 4 wide receivers. They have Saquon Barkley for half the game because he gets banged up. Daniel Jones is hobbled from the week before. They don't have their number 1 cornerback. They don't have their number 1 defensive lineman, and they go and stifle Aaron Rodgers and give up 0 offensive points for the Green Bay Packers in the second half. The NFC East has gone from being the least to the best. They're even better than the AFC West now that the Denver Broncos and the Raiders have gotten off to slow starts. I was going to bring up the AFC West. I don't want to touch Rob's feelings. I don't want to play with his feelings. But the NFC East has been the best division, and that is quite remarkable. And let's go Giants.
I mean, you still got the Commanders in that division, so we don't want to get Ron Rivera, quarterback. We don't want to get too carried away with ourselves, but certainly make some great points. This is a tough one here. You know, after some firm consideration, I'm going to have to give this one over to Zach. Just points about the NFC East. It was something that no one expected. Everyone's talking about, and although concussions are a great storyline, the NFL does like to sweep it under the rug as much as they can. So as big of a story as it is, they don't want it to be. But loving the looks of the NFC East. Yeah, you know, you're talking about the Broncos,
Derek,
but that's
give me
okay.
that camera, Derek. Right here, camera 1.
Zach, tell me how you're feeling after this
come
one.
on, let's get camera 1 in here, Derek. Let's go. All right.
Who did they play?
Dan.
What?
Dan goes and tries to talk up the LA Clippers and then talks about every other team in the West and how good they all are.
Wait.
He's just not a pro. He's young. I've been here. I do it. I know how to argue. He'll get there.
SNY Big Shot.
You know,
everyone.
I was actually very impressed with Dan. I was very impressed. Usually, you know, I get people like Derek who I can just walk all over. So I got Dan. It was tough competition. He's got some things he's got to learn, but you know, the king just stays on his throne. It's
Gives you run
just
for your money.
it's just what we do. The concussions was a good come. I had no idea what you're gonna do. It was a great job.
Young Buck, your first performance.
I had
What
a
are your
lot of
thoughts?
fun. I had a lot of fun. I love being up here. Zach, that was a fun debate. Really some great topics. I love talking about the LA Clippers. Man,
Choke artist.
hearing you talk about the Giants is just always kind of painful. I just don't like that division whatsoever.
It's because we beat the Patriots twice. In the
Yeah,
Super Bowl.
whatever. Anyway, the Eagles, again, terrible. But that was a lot of fun. I'm going to be back here. I'm going to win against Zach one of these days. You know,
it's
pretty close. Give him a run for his money.
Love to see it. Well, that's all we have for Prove Your Point. Stay tuned as Nick Vete gives you the Marist Sports Rundown brought to you by Center Field. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back, everybody, as we give you an update on the latest from Marist Athletics. Fall sports are well underway as volleyball, men's soccer, and women's soccer were in action this past week. We begin, though, with football, as the Red Foxes are winners of 2 of their last 3 games, beating Stetson on the road 45-31 this past Saturday. With the recent success, Marist now sits tied for 3rd in the Pioneer League football standings. The men's soccer team has not enjoyed the same recent success, though, as they have lost 3 conference games in a row, dropping their overall record to 5-5-1 on the season. The season-ending injury to top striker Richard Morel against Quinnipiac was a devastating loss for the Red Foxes, and they will need to rediscover their form soon as just 6 games remain in the regular season. The women's soccer team tied Siena this past Saturday thanks to a goal from Amanda Caldarelli. Marist currently sits at 8th in the MAC and will have to perform well in their final 4 games to earn a postseason berth. Lastly, the women's volleyball team has been playing very well of late, as they are winners of 4 of their last 5 games, bringing their conference record to 6-2 on the season. That's good enough to have them sitting 3rd in the MAC at this point in the year, looking to make a deep postseason run this year. For all the latest news and updates on Marist Athletics, be sure to check out the Centerfield Marist website, as well as the Red Fox Report, presented by the Marist Center for Sports Communication on Instagram. That's all we have for today. I'm Nick Vete, and thank you for joining us on this episode of Halftime on the Hudson.